that's sport. Like, yeah, it might seem nasty, but if you also go into any other sport, when someone sees a weakness, they will try to exploit that. I think Sarah can obviously take a lot of, I guess take it as a compliment that now she has the best riders in the world taking crazy risks on a descent to try and drop her. Which is pretty cool because when I'm there at the back of peloton on a descent, no one gives a flying because they don't care that I'm still there because I'm not a threat whatsoever. So they're not trying to drop me. But it is cool that she's in that situation. Right, welcome back to Train Like a Monk. We've had a bit of a summer hiatus due to me ended up getting the call up to a Tour de France podcast, which was very fun to do at the time, but I did very much get sick of talking about cycling. But talking in the Tour de France, I didn't do anything that was actually useful. This man that I have on today did something that was very useful in the women's race in terms of he was coaching in the lead up and throughout the Tour de France. I'm sure Australia's big hope, Sarah Gigante, and she's a big listener of the show. I think she has requested this interview more than anyone for this guest that I have on today. But he's received a lot of other requests to get this man on. He's the coach of the month, Dylan Lindsay. Welcome to Train Like a Monk.
Thanks, Cyrus, for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of it. It's also probably one of my favourite podcasts as well, so it's a little bit eerie to actually be sitting here on it. But yeah, keen to get amongst it.
Yeah, so you had a few requests and plenty of good questions that we will try and get to as many as we can. A few from your colleagues at Pinnacle Performance that we probably won't get to. But do you want to give us a rundown of, I guess, your coaching background, because the coaches are always working behind the scenes and no one tends to have a good clue of who they are and where they've come from. And I guess you coaching Sarah has put you in the limelight a little bit, and the fact that Sarah always mentions you in such high regard clearly shows that you know what you're doing and you have a really good working relationship with her. But do you want to give us a rundown on your coaching background and, I guess, Pinnacle Performance, a company that you started up down in Melbourne there?
Yeah, cool. So I founded Pinnacle Performance fresh out of my first uni degree, which I did at Fed Uni back in Ballarat, like in 2018 or 2017. I finished that up. I was really lucky to get placement with Ken Ballhouse at Adaptive Human Performance for that final year of my uni. So off the back foot of that, I started Pinnacle, and yeah, I was in the pocket of Victoria in Portland at the time, and 2 years ago moved up here on the peninsula close to Melbourne to sort of set up shop here with my mate Jack Marshall, who's the other director of Pinnacle as well. And we coach a handful of really cool athletes, and have like a testing centre and some bike fitting services here as well.
Yeah, nice stuff. So I coach Jack, so it's a bit funny. Jack is your partner in Pinnacle Performance, and then also one of the other coaches at Pinnacle Performance, Tynan Shannon, has been tearing everyone a new one, including me, at every race in Australia recently. So it's cool to see, I guess, three young guys building something in Melbourne, building the sport in that area, and to see it, succeeding already in the athletes that you've taken on, and then now succeeding at such a high level with coaching Sarah and plenty of other high level athletes on the Australian scene as well. But we're going to go more into, I guess, the reason most people will be listening to this is they'll want to see how Sarah's Tour de France prep went and how you prepare someone for the Tour de France. Now, we both are very aware that Sarah's performance there isn't a surprise at all, because I remember seeing Sarah in the juniors, extremely talented cyclist the whole way through. And yeah, it's one thing to be a talented junior and then the next thing to be at the point where you're actually contesting for a Tour de France yellow jersey. There's a lot of people that don't continue on that pathway once they get started on it. So you've obviously had a big part to play in that. I guess the first question would be, at what point in Sarah's journey did you believe that she'd be able to get to this level where she's racing for the win in the biggest tour on the calendar.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting case study for me to be a part of, because I started coaching Sarah the year that she won the national road title. So pretty much back in 2018, I think it was. So I've had a long time with Sarah and coaching her. And there's always been a huge amount of promise. And I think there's always been internally an enormous amount of belief as well. I don't necessarily think there's really ever been a time where we didn't think that we would have a crack and reach those kind of heights. I think in terms of when we started to see like the data to sort of back up what we believe we could achieve was probably as late as last year, sort of when we started to really achieve things at Tour Down Under and that kind of thing.
And part of that, I'm guessing, is because of Sarah's very interrupted run, in terms of the fact she's never been able to have, even from in recent memory anyway, a 6-month clear period with nothing going wrong and no sickness or injury, and the majority of this is completely through no fault of her own and nothing other than just bad luck. So that would be one of the questions I would have, is when you are working with someone that is having all of these issues, are you playing a big part in picking her back up when all this stuff goes wrong, or is she just someone herself that is that driven that as soon as she has something go wrong, like if anyone has seen, the news has been everywhere in the last week, she has just broken her femur after having one of the best seasons of her life, a very short season, but she has had a lot of bad luck in her career. Are you someone that's having to pick her back up and motivate her to get to the next goal, or is she someone that immediately after is just switched on and focused straight ahead?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I wouldn't necessarily think that I have to play a role in picking her back up to re-motivate her. She's very intrinsically motivated. I certainly am pretty close to this as well, so I have that feeling as well of devastation when she gets injured and that kind of thing. I think my role in those scenarios is just to show support and care, and then take a seat back, and just let her sort of recover and refresh, and then we go again and reset once we sort of know a bit more and that kind of thing. But yeah, it is tough.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good one, because I find it tricky as a coach as well, because it doesn't matter what the issue an athlete is having, whether it is a physical one from an injury, often that's pretty closely related then to mental health, when you have athletes battling some mental demons because they're out of action because of an injury or whatever else is going on in their life. And sometimes it is tricky in terms of, okay, what am I actually supposed to do here? Because you have a sports science degree or a degree in that area, it is very different to playing the role of a psychologist, which is sometimes what you find yourself sliding into, and something that we're not qualified to do anywhere near the amount that a true professional in that area would be. So like you said, just showing support and care, and then taking a step back, because what I find, some people feel guilt on not being able to do the training when they can't do the training, and they feel, and that can be placed on them completely indirectly by a coach, in terms of, this coach has always been the one getting me out the door, getting me training, and now I can't do it for whatever reason, and they feel guilty towards the coach. So that thing, that the way that you're responding to it in terms of just showing support and care, and then just being prepared to take a step back and let them recover.
Yeah, I think so. And I think in that scenario, and I'm happy to admit that Sarah is obviously in a reasonably privileged position with VIS and her team as well. But in those scenarios, you kind of have to leave your ego out the door a little bit and just say, well, most of this stuff isn't in my scope. I'll fit in where I can. But if we don't know the answers to certain things, or it's not within my knowledge, then we need to find those people and bring them into the team, the support team, and sort of work alongside.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing as a coach in any area, and we'll get to some other things as well with some of the questions that came in, but just being prepared to, when it's not something that you're an expert in, to push them somewhere else. Not push them somewhere else, but bring in people when there is the opportunity to. And in Sarah's case, she is able to get good support at the moment in certain areas when she needs it, and it's the same with any athlete that you're coaching, I guess, that whether it be specific nutrition stuff, whether it's specific stuff in the gym, where as a cycling coach, you're very much a generalist in terms of you've got a pretty good understanding of a lot of areas because that's what's required as part of the job. But when there's something that needs some really specific knowledge, there's no point going, like, for example, with the iliac artery issue that Sarah had last year, there's no point you trying to do the surgery on the iliac artery in that instance. So there's some times that you have to just...
I actually did have a crack
I'm
first.
not the expert here.
Yeah, no, I did have a crack first. I was like, I better let the surgeon have a... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. He just tidied it up after. So, and then a few other ones I've got just on working with Sarah and then in general as well is when you are doing this, Sarah's obviously from Melbourne, Brunswick Cycling Club growing up, but even when I'm sure she is in Melbourne, the majority of the work that you're doing is remote, and it's a funny sport, cycling, in that coaches are very different in cycling to other sports, in that if you look at like team sports, AFL, cricket, like the biggest ones in Australia, the coach is there every single training session, every single game, right there. He's the one directing them at the thing. In cycling, it's the sports director that's there on the training camps for the majority of the time, and at the races itself doing the pep talks the day before. So I guess remotely, what are the challenges when you are working remotely? And then also, when do you decide I want to be there on the ground? So I know you've gone to Girona before to work with Sarah directly, and sometimes in Melbourne, I'm sure you catch up with Sarah when you can, and with other athletes as well. So what are the biggest challenges, I guess, in working remotely, and what makes you decide that you want to be there with the person at a certain period?
Yeah, cool. So I think I'm actually really envious of the guys who get to work in like AFL and that and just rock up every day and see their athletes. I think if I could have that in a cycling sense, that would be my absolute dream. And it is certainly very challenging to do it remotely. You do end up having to really rely a lot on athlete feedback and that kind of thing, and the conversations that you have over a Zoom call or Messenger and Training Peaks, and looking at data, and it's all just that kind of stuff, and having really good conversations and knowing the athlete really well. But it is very, very challenging. That specific instance of going over to Girona last year was sort of had a few different meanings to it. I think for me, on a personal note, it was a bit of a goal of mine to coach someone to the Tour de France, and I kind of wanted to live in it a little bit, and actually be a part of it a bit more than just sitting behind a computer and then watching it on the couch. So I got to enjoy that. But we also decided that Sarah wouldn't go to altitude and would stay in Girona for that block, which was a tricky decision for a few different reasons.
Yep.
And I wanted, because she would be training by herself and it was comfortably her biggest race she had ever done, I wanted to sort of deload that pressure that she might have experienced while she was training by herself, and actually just ensure that she was having fun, really, and it was actually a really enjoyable experience. Her training quality, we did some testing and that kind of thing, which was really interesting and important, and also to look back on now. But she already trains very well by herself, and I really wanted to make sure that she was supported and she could enjoy that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like she's someone that needs the motivation of you being there with a stick, whipping her to get up these climbs in Girona there. But yeah, I think it's something that I definitely notice, that when I have the opportunity to do it with athletes that I'm coaching, that it does make a big difference. And as you said, it would be so nice if you could be there the whole time as a coach and, genuinely be there. I often just find it's not so much about getting more out of the athlete in each session, but just ensuring that if they have a better understanding as they're doing the session of what the purpose behind it is, roughly how hard it needs to be, and then just reinforcing why they're doing it as well, which is a big thing that you can do when you are there, rather than just with a call or a text after the session when they go, okay, I wasn't feeling that good and this bit hurt a lot. And then when you follow it up after, then it's okay. But if you can give that direct feedback at the time of this part of the interval is intentionally hard for this reason, or the reason you're not feeling good is because of this, and this, like the environmental conditions, the load that we've done in the lead up, these kinds of things that as an athlete, because you've ridden a lot yourself as well, there is often a lot of doubts when you are just suffering of, is this going to make me better, for one, and why am I suffering so much? And if you can alleviate those doubts as a coach when you're there, I think that makes a big difference. So is it something that I guess that you'll aim to do more of in the future, or it's just genuinely going to be tricky to actually manufacture that you're able to be there with your top athletes when they're preparing for big goals?
No, that's the longer term goal of Pinnacle as a whole company, really. Like, we've set up shop here in Mornington, but we want to be like a moving circus a little bit. So how that sort of operates and looks like is still in the works, but certainly wanting to sort of be adaptable and be able to move around, go to races in Australia through the summer, but then more importantly as well, flicking across to Europe, because on top of that, I'm sick of winter, so I really wanted to start following summer, mate. Yeah.
It's a good tax-deductible holiday as well.
Oh, it's incredible. Yeah.
That's the number one reason. Let's not muck around.
Yeah.
And then, so if we go into the specifics of this year, I guess, now, like, whenever we see someone perform really well in a race, I'm always interested about what they did differently in the build-up. Now, Sarah performed really well in last year's Tour de France as well, but completely different performance, completely different build-up, this year, in terms of the fact that she didn't know she was racing the Tour de France for sure until within a week of the race. When you are planning out her season, and it was a very interrupted season to begin with because she started so late due to the surgery at the end of last year, when you're planning that out, did you have in the back of your mind where you want to still give her the opportunity to be flying in the Tour de France, or was the prep always just for the Giro and then we'll see what happens after that?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking as early as January, it was very much just let's see what happens. Obviously, we were really restricted by what we could do on the bike and everything else surrounding it. So we really had to be quite patient and see where that first 5 to 7 weeks went. And then once that went really well, and we can talk about what we did in that time and that kind of thing, we sort of started to build that race calendar. And we knew that the Giro was potentially a very achievable goal, and then just around the corner is the Tour. And both Sarah and I Sarah more importantly, wanted that as her goals, and we just planned for success. Obviously, selection was quite late for the Tour, but we had certainly planned internally to go full steam ahead for it. So it was certainly a late selection, late call-up, but we had prepared as though we were doing it.
Yep. And then I guess she was lucky in a way. I saw a lot of people commentators saying how she's definitely hampered in that she had to prepare much later than others. When others were doing high intensity stuff in March, she was still unable to even do any kind of intensity from what I could see. And then she also had the shoulder injury as well, which meant that when she was training, it was just on the trainer. But the funny thing for me is always that and I'm interested in your thoughts of this as a coach, when you're racing and when you start on this sort of, it's like a chain of races that you'll see pros get into during a season, where if you want to do this race, you prep by doing this, and this race, you lose control as a coach in terms of you can't control how hard these races are going to be. You can't really control the training response that the athlete will get from these races. So you guys had it a little bit differently in the fact that Sarah was mostly training rather than racing over this period. Was that something that you thought as well of as a positive? Because for me, honestly, while there's a lot of negatives in terms of having these injuries, and a lot of those aren't controllable things as well, at the same time, we're seeing more this lean towards, if you have the opportunity, just train rather than race because of having that control and being able to do the specifics. Is that something that you thought of as well, or would you have preferred she was able to just race?
Yeah, and that's sort of been the story of Sarah's career so far in the races that she's done. It's like building towards these big goals through the tours, but then having to sort of survive the classics. And I think it's the classics in particular are a really tricky one to navigate because there's a lot of you might get 2 race days a week and then the rest of it's just recovering and tapering in. And whilst those races are very, very hard, and there is definitely a good stimulus coming from those races, there is a lot of deconditioning that happens from if you look at it like a 4 or 5 week block of racing, you don't come out of that faster all the time. You sometimes come out of it a little bit.
No.
Yeah, you don't really come out of it in a great
position. Particularly for the women, that's more of a challenge because I know myself from racing last year, I was just able to hold fitness if I was able to ride really hard and finish all of the races I was doing. And I did every single race in that period, in the classics period from Moffat Newsblood to Roubaix. I think I missed one of the classics. And that even still, I was just losing fitness. And that was going as hard as I can through every single race. So in the women's races, the races aren't 5-6 hours, they're 3-4 hours. So then it becomes tricky when you're doing 2, 3 or 4 hour sessions per week that are actually hard, and then the rest, you can't just choose not to recover between the races or you'll rock up to the next race cooked. So then that's a big challenge for a lot of riders now in terms of going through that classics period and then still having the fitness to then be in a good position to tackle the tours after that. Yeah. So is it something that you'd look at in the future in terms of going, can we try and maybe do half a classics block instead of the full classics block so that she has more training prep?
Yeah, and it was a really tricky position to be in. I think last year was a prime example of what we're talking about, where Sarah had the big classics block in Belgium for, I think it was a 5-week block, and then we had a week and a half, and it was the Vuelta, which was her A goal for the year alongside the tour. And they're not the same style of racing either. So you're not getting that race specific work for your A goal in that crucial 4-week block that you kind of want to do it. And I think not just Sarah as well, but I think the Women's World Tour, the way that it went this year, specifically with Prevost winning and the way that she prepared for it, I think there's going to be a lot of change in riders being a bit more specific to certain events. And there'll be a handful of riders that I think will just target the Grand Tours and that kind of thing. There'll still be races in their calendar, which I won't have control over. That's AG's decision. Yeah. But I think there's definitely going to be a lot more talk about targeting events and being really purposeful around it and what you see, like your builds look like and that, which is really exciting because we've not necessarily done that. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit there.
Yeah, and that's something that I think it's a funny one that a lot of people assume that pros have everything better than amateurs, and that is one thing where pros don't have it better than amateurs in terms of if you're the regular punter training up for a Grand Fondo, like in Australia, I'm sure you're doing a lot of programs now for Amy's Grand Fondo, that it's super easy to just go, okay, we've got 8 weeks till this goal, this is what it looks like, lay it out. As long as they don't get sick or injured, they're pretty much able to just hit all of that. There's no travel. There's no, maybe they have to change a session for the rain or because their kid's got a soccer match or something. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to map things out. Whereas as a pro, that is so rare to just have that 8 week build into a race where you can do everything exactly how you want to do it. So I think it's something that I've predicted would happen this year. I've seen it more in the men's peloton for sure, that the big dogs aren't doing as much racing. They're just targeting what they want to do. I think there's a lot of... there's been more research around using these 1 week stage races at the right time because the 1 week stage race is a little more predictable than the classics in terms of if you go and do Paris-Nice, for example, you can roughly predict how much a training stimulus you're going to get from that. And then so you'll see riders use a 1 week stage race and then take the next 3 weeks off, go do training, hit all the areas that they missed in that stage race. So the thing for the women is a lot of those stage races as well tend to be 4 or 5 days. It can be trickier then to manage that. So I think I would agree that you'll see more riders do the Pauline Ferrand-Prévot approach next year and just be a bit more picky about which races they do, which is a little bit of a loss for the women's peloton because part of the good thing about watching it the last few years has been all the best riders do every single race, and that's always just been the way it is. But now we'll see them be a bit more pick and choosy, but at the same time, it makes that anticipation a little bit higher when you do see the big dogs all lining up at the same race.
Yeah, and I think that though, to play devil's advocate as well, I think it'll also show the depth of women's cycling, which is actually growing quite a bit. So you might see some specific classics riders that you might not have seen in the past who have been role players or that kind of thing, who are actually very, very elite as well, get their time to shine, which will be exciting. Be a whole new ballgame potentially.
Yeah, and it'll be cool to watch how it plays out. And then, of course, we'll also see the calendar shape up a bit differently in the women's calendar to allow for that. And we're seeing the Giro move next year, which will be good because at least then it won't clash with the Tour and we'll get to watch another big GC battle there and everyone will actually have their eyes on it, which will be good. But the last one before we get into the usual run of questions, and then we'll tackle the listener questions, which we've got plenty of. But I guess throughout Sarah's training, her key sessions, and this sort of ties into our usual run. So Sarah's question to you was, when can she do her 3x40 minute intervals again? Because that's her favourite session to do. And she said she hasn't got to do it much this year. So that's her favourite one. She said it on this podcast, I think, which is absolutely sick because I don't think anyone's said that 40-minute intervals are their favourites. But if she wasn't doing those in the lead up, what were some of the key sessions that she was using?
Yeah. So the 3x40, Sarah, if you are listening, you can probably do that once your leg's healed. We'll look into that later. But I suppose the theory behind that is that kind of work is, like, from a physiological standpoint, was Sarah's honey hole. Like, that is her major strength. And if we're looking, like, she's probably butting her head against the ceiling of how much more she can improve her LT1 and that kind of thing. For instance, if you were to write down a list of things that is stopping Sarah from winning the Tour, it's certainly not that, and all the things that go with that style of session. So a lot of our work was around sort of building power at VO2 max and being slightly more glycolytic as well, so you can follow surges and be a bit more aggressive when attacking and that kind of thing. They were the really things that we wanted to get our hands dirty with during training to work on and improve.
Yep. And were you still trying to do anything to top up because a lot of people I coach, I always have this issue when I've coached a lot of diesels with the same skill set, like attributes, that they're not going to lose any races because they weren't able to just keep dieseling away with a high LT1 at that top of zone 2, LT1, whichever terminology you want to use, but we need to work on the top end. And then the first thing when I start to introduce that is this panic of, oh my God, I'm going to lose my strength. So was there any work to try and maintain that lower end diesel skill that she has, or just the fact that she tends to just ride around pretty solid anyway, was that enough to just still maintain that?
Yeah, so through the first block of her training, sort of once she was allowed to train, sort of, I think she started in just after January, so February. I think the conversation that we had with the physios and the doctors was that was pretty much the only style of riding that she could do. So it was actually a really good lesson in that whole rebuild. Is the big focus that the VIS were really good at, which I absolutely loved, was they didn't really focus on what they can't do. They were talking about, what can we do from a training perspective? So that was the style of training that we could do. So we did do a lot of it then, because that was as hard as we could ride. But then after that, no, we didn't really touch that zone. We obviously did a lot of endurance riding, but it was significantly lower power. I think you're probably looking at, her endurance rides at 180 to 200 watts, as opposed to those efforts that, they climb up to 230 to 240 watts for Sarah. So it's a lot lower intensity. But that's still going to be enough for someone like her to maintain that for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's really...
With the volume she's doing as well, that would be the big thing, because she is someone that loves to just put in the hours, and this is sort of the thing that I always say is a lot of people are so focused on the intensity distribution, but just riding that much has such a big impact on your LT1 as well.
Yeah, exactly, and it's really counterintuitive as well. If you're trying to build all these glycolytic capacities, VO2 max and that kind of thing, and you just smash a heap of volume on top of it, and that LT won't work. Like, they're just going to butt heads against each other. It's actually, you're not going to get the adaptation you're after. So, yeah, had to steer clear.
And so is that one more just before we get onto the usual questions? But is that something that you have to really fight with Sarah about, because she's someone that just loves riding, and I've seen whenever she has a free day to do it, she tends to do a 6 or 7 hour day. And Chris Harper, the last episode on the podcast, was the same. He said his coach has just like put a cap on it and said 8 hours is the max. But is it something that you have to really focus on throttling her back on? Because from a physiology standpoint, I have this conversation with athletes as well, in that if we go out and do a glycolytic capacity session and like they get 2/3 of the way through it, can't quite hit the numbers, and then just go, I'll just ride an extra 2 hours to make up for it because I feel bad because I couldn't get the session done, completely just goes against the actual physiology of trying to improve that system, because then the muscle cell itself isn't that smart. If you are just giving it all these different signals, it just isn't going to move too much in any direction at that time, and you just basically blunting all your stimuli. So is it something that you have to fight a little bit with Sarah or other athletes on at specific times to say, no, you can't actually ride any longer, we need to just call it for today and stop pedaling around?
Yeah, definitely. After the Tour de France, we had like a mental reset week, so there was a lot of days off to sort of tick the box of recovering physiologically, and then I wrote RDOs on Training Peaks, and funny enough, she actually didn't know what an RDO was because she hasn't worked a day in her life. So every now and then we'll just like throw that in, and she can just ride for as long as she wants. Definitely can be challenging at times, just to sort of keep a lid on that. However, I would attribute a lot of Sarah's improvements this year to her improvement in that area. So she's definitely better at keeping a lid on things at most times, and her deload blocks and deload weeks have been tenfold better than what they have been in the past. So she's actually adapting to the work, which is then also doubling down. Her key sessions are like way more consistent, and it's been a completely different Sarah this year in terms of her training, which is it's remarkable. I'm really happy, really proud of her, what she's done in terms of this year.
Yeah, and that's a big one, I guess, in terms of, I like to have similar weeks where, with athletes that I coach, and with myself as well, actually, with my own training, but where you are taking a break from the structured training, but there's still the option to ride. And for me, the assumption is usually that there will be a little bit less riding in this week, because then we'll get back into structured training, and we don't want you to have too much underlying fatigue at the end of that mental reset week. And you want a little bit of a physical reset, but I'm never enforcing someone not to ride, because for most people that are doing this, whether it's a hobby or a profession, it's because they like riding. So the tricky thing is always when you give that mental reset week and then they arrive at the end of that more cooked physically than they were at the start of that, and then you go, okay, well now we actually want to train, but instead of getting into this structured training, I've got to force you to take 3 rest days to recover from your rest week. So it's a tricky balance there, but I think that's really interesting that's what's allowed Sarah to make steps forward as well. And I think hopefully for people listening to this that are inclined to just go out and just keep hammering away, that's actually where you take those steps forward, is in those recovery weeks and allowing your body to adapt to that training load.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been hugely important.
Yep. So we'll get into the usual questions, and we'll make these a little bit rapid fire, just because we got some listener ones coming later on. So we've talked about Sarah's favourite training session. What would your favourite training session be? And I know there's no session that you are going to prescribe to absolutely everyone at every time, but if you had to say, this is my favourite session, this is what gets the most out of people, what would it be?
Most out of people? I'm a big fan of a 30-15, so just like a 3x12 30-15 block. You can do a lot with... Actually, you can do a lot with a block of 30-15s, and then the second day with like a 90 to 95% with some spikes in it. That goes a long way, those two sessions.
And what's your rationale behind 30-15 instead of 40-20? It's the ugly stepsister.
Yeah, well, I think it is a lot harder. a lot harder, to be honest. And I think if you are aiming to improve VO2 max and you want to spend as much time as possible above, say, 90% of VO2 max, I think the 30-15 just gets it done a little bit better, especially if that 15-second window is not too easy. But it is a very, very hard session.
Yeah. No, that 5 seconds makes a huge difference. Yeah, I had only started doing... I was always a massive 40-20 fan. Only started throwing in some 30-15s last few years. And, I've come around to them now. I tend to mix it up in both. But, I'd still have 40-20s slightly above 30-15s in terms of what I prefer, just because I hate how quick that 15 seconds goes. But... still, they're both pretty good. What would be your least favourite then?
My least favourite ride, or to prescribe, or to do myself?
Yeah, to prescribe or to do, if they're different.
I don't really, I'll never prescribe like a fast ride or like a sort of moving away from like an SE as well, unless it's we're sort of doing a little bit differently now. So they're probably my least two favourites. I don't necessarily think they're super beneficial.
Yeah. Well, that ticks off one of the other questions as well, which is low carb or well fed. So that will save us a bit. Okay, when you're prescribing efforts, are you big on setting when the efforts are done in the ride, or are you happy for the athlete to choose?
Yeah, I mean, it depends what you're working on, of course, but I think dream scenario is you get them done early for quality when glycogen stores are really high and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, people want to just ride out to a climb and get them done. So that can take X amount of time and then just get it done and do the endurance after, ideally.
Yeah, and I think that's a big one for the majority of people that we're both coaching aren't professionals that live in an amazing place for riding where they can choose exactly what time they want to do the efforts. So then it's just a matter of what's most practical and go with that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm also not against them just picking a route that has 3 climbs and just popping the intervals on one of each climb 2 at a time. So it's just, make it practical.
Yeah, whichever works. All right, are you someone that doesn't mind athletes taking a bit of rope and changing the program around, or do you prefer they stick to the plan or give you a heads up if they're going to change anything?
Yeah, no, they need to give a heads up because I want to be a part of the team, but I definitely love them grabbing the wheel, and I'll just sit in the passenger seat and help steer, help guide the map, sort of thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's cool, and to give. I think that brings them into the process a lot more, as we talked about, like the why. Why are they doing this stuff if they've got a little bit of a choice in the matter? And then particularly like working with people in Melbourne where at this time of year there's going to be like the last few months anyway, a lot of times that they might have to change things around slightly because of Melbourne weather. To give the athlete a little bit of autonomy there to be able to switch things around when it's needed is very handy.
I think it's kind of sorry. I'll move away from short.
No, you go.
I think it's important as well to just retain like a vertical relationship with your athlete as well, because you want them to like be a part of it and to really buy in, and you don't want to put yourself on top of them and just say do as I say. Want to have a bit of want them to have a bit of a say in it and a bit of a voice and be a part of the journey. Yeah,
for sure. Are you someone that recommends your athletes ride solo or with a group, or you don't care?
Really depends. Those 3x40s are probably getting done solo, but I'm certainly not against people doing like their blocks of their intervals and they're just ticking on their endurance with a group. It just depends on personal preference. I think you kind of need both. A lot of people get into cycling to do it with mates, so don't just throw that away to try and win races. You can definitely have both.
Definitely. And topical at the moment, when it is terrible weather in Melbourne, are you prescribing just trainer workouts, or are you recommending people get out in the rain, like when they've got those endurance rides? Are you switching them around? Like, how much are you telling someone to just grab a rain jacket and go out and get it done?
Never. I think you can pretty much move things around to avoid bad weather, especially if I'm not chucking someone outside for 5 hours when it's like shocking weather, and then I pay the price because they're sick for an entire week. So, we can move things around.
Yep, nice. And then stops or no stops in a ride. Do you look at the elapsed time after each ride to just check someone's not spending 3 hours at the cafe on their Sunday ride, or do you mind if they're taking stops?
Mate, I'm probably the worst for it, so I can't really tell them not to. I'd probably, yeah, definitely stops. Have a couple of cafe stops if you really want to.
Yeah, okay. Yep. And then we've covered the low carb or well fed. The last one for this section, and then we'll come back to it later. But do you recommend any cross training for your athletes? So,
yeah.
like gym, I'm going to assume comes in, but anything outside of gym?
Outside of gym, not as much. We maybe just dabble absolutely like very, very carefully and very lightly into running in off seasons for the athletes that want to just mix up a little bit. But beyond getting in the weight room and building strength, we don't really do anything else that's not just cycling.
Yeah. Have you recommended that your other athletes get on the driving range with you? Because you've been hitting up the golf course pretty regularly recently.
Yeah. That would be an acceptable form of cross training for sure.
Not too many TSS from 9 holes.
Oh, it depends how badly you're hitting them and how angry you get.
Yeah, you might be doing some 30-30s across the field at some point.
That's me.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get through some of these listener questions. Thanks so much, everyone, for sending them in, because we do have plenty to get through. And Sarah herself put herself out there and put up a story, which she got a heap through as well. So I am going to just try and quickly vet some of these that we should be using, because the majority of the ones that we can't use, unfortunately, are from your colleagues or just residents of the Mornington Peninsula where you're working. So I've got to get to the most popular one at first, and then we'll get to the other ones after that. But well, from Ben Helsinger has said, how is he so talented, handsome, beautiful, and still single? And then we've got Nathan Mann asking, need to know this guy's relationship status. So for everyone listening, what is the relationship status before we get into the other questions?
I think actually on Facebook it's still down as it's complicated as a bit of a gag, but certainly still single, mate.
All right, there we go. So we've got any takers listening. This can be our next Married at First Sight podcast. Train like a monk. But all right, so to get into a few of these, and we've got so many, and we're not going to be able to go into depth on all of them, but first up, my Tour de France podcast colleague, Burgess and his bike, has said, how do you do Zone 2 properly? So this is a whole podcast in itself, but when you're getting riders to target Zone 2 and like prescribing, I guess, a ride where Zone 2 is the main goal, what's that look like? What's your standard Zone 2 session?
I mean, that's the 3x40 that Sarah's talking. That's upper Zone 2, so it seems really high for Sarah, but she's probably an outlier in that scenario. Can be tricky to try and pinpoint with just a power target off the back of like a threshold test or something like that. It sort of does vary a handful of percent for each person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's generally between 75 and maybe like the mid 80% is a safe range, and just doing constant blocks of that I'm happy with. I think that's going to get the adaptation.
And you always prescribing those off power, or do you ever use heart rate for that as well?
Yeah, a bit of both. I think heart rate's a bit more interesting in terms. You kind of almost need to use both, to be honest. And I think heart rate's an interesting metric to use alongside power and seeing how that drifts across the ride. But yeah, I think heart rate's probably where it's at in that sense, as to like where to.
Yeah, and that's one of the only sessions that I would ever use heart rate for a prescription tool. I'll really often use it for post-analysis, but because for most people, they don't have access to 40-minute climbs to do those longer efforts on, and it's just going to, naturally, the power's going to fluctuate if you have any undulating road, even a flat road where you've just got to get off the pedals for corners or whatever. So heart rate can be a little bit easier to use those, to do those on. Next question from Robbo Jeffries. As a coach, how much do you think about fueling when prescribing or designing a training, a session, a set?
Yeah, massively. So, like I sort of alluded to, really want to fuel every session really well to get quality in, but that also is important to back up sessions as well, and make sure you're actually adapting, like driving the adaptation with good fueling and being able to do it on a consistent basis. But I think from a prescription standpoint, the reason I would space out key sessions across the week in my mind is so then I'm knowing that they've got a reasonable amount of time to restore glycogen after hard sessions. So, you wouldn't want to do more than 2, maybe 3 very hard sessions in a week, or key sessions and not very hard sessions, for largely so that they can be fully stocked up in glycogen.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting that it's, for me, I guess, because there's been such focus on it recently at the pro level, it's just assumed that you'll be able to get the food in because you're focusing on it so much. It's definitely something that I always have to check myself that the people at home just aren't able to get in the same amount of food as a pro cyclist, just mostly from a time perspective, in terms of like if they're working a 9 to 5, they've got their lunch break where it's pretty hard to just shovel in a kilo of pasta in a lunch break, and then just throughout the rest of the day, even just during their training sessions. It's something that I always forget to reinforce, that when you do have these athletes, especially the bigger male athletes, putting out just big numbers over and over and over again to stay on top of that fueling. So yeah, it's interesting that you're using that to structure the training week. The next one from Carolina Perakitko is and I think gonna guess she is European from the name, but also from the question, but do long intervals like 20-minute around FTP are efficient? So I'm going to guess it's just more, are you using 20-minute FTP intervals close to that? And do you think they're efficient way to improve your FTP, I guess?
Yes, they will work in certain circumstances. I think it certainly helps for time to exhaustion and that kind of thing, and actually being able to hold where you think your threshold sits. It's definitely some ways that I would probably restructure that session though to make it a little bit more effective. I certainly think throwing in some cheeky spikes in there, or making it a little bit more over-under style work, still doing longer blocks over-under maybe, I think is a little bit more beneficial.
Yep, yeah, and it's interesting. It's really old school set, just 20 minutes at close to FTP. Often just 90% is the standard for it. But I am seeing a lot more now of the over-under stuff being used more regularly, and there's some pretty good evidence to show that it's going to be slightly more beneficial just having some spikes in there. The thing that I would often still, I still prescribe those just as a progression to getting towards putting the spikes in terms of if you can't ride for 20 minutes at just under your threshold, you definitely can't ride for 20 minutes at just under your threshold with spikes. Yep. So sometimes it's just a matter of getting that progression there. And obviously you might say if you can't ride for 20 minutes just below your threshold's set wrong. If this is more so for just people coming off break, people just getting back into it, not wanting to suffer that much. So that is the time that I would use them.
Yeah, and it's like, really, it's just production rate versus clearance rate of blood lactate. Yep. So it's really just challenging those two things, I think, is the best bet.
Yep. And then this one from it's Richard is, how hard is it to keep up with the changing times for better training? So I guess in this would be you graduated from your first degree in 2018. There has been a hell of a lot of sports science come out since then in journals, and also just even stuff that doesn't make it journals that pro teams are taking on. How are you staying on top of all of that with your coaching and prescription?
Yeah, it is the hardest part of my job, I think, is staying up to date. And I think that I went back to university when I moved to Melbourne. I just thought further my degree and sort of get more educated and that kind of thing, which helps probably the most at the moment. But I also think just having a good network of very good coaches, sort of lean on legends like Jack and Tyne, and obviously in our organisation, our messenger group goes off all day just discussing training, but also outward of that, Nick Owen chats to a lot, and just trying to keep relevant and discuss ideas is always a really big thing.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that in Australia there is that community now, in Melbourne particularly, that a lot of good coaches down there that are able to discuss their different training. It is a pretty small world in terms of there's not that many, but the ones that there are know each other. Like the vast majority of the high-performing cyclists in Australia would be amongst 10 coaches, even nationally, I think. So it's a pretty small world there, but it's good that you have the opportunity to do that networking, learn from each other, because it's what the sports scientists and coaches in Europe are able to do just with access to the teams in a way. So if you are working with teams, for example, the team I was on the last few years, Q36.5, all those coaches are able to chat constantly about what kind of techniques they're using, how they're prescribing their training, what's new, that kind of stuff. So to be able to have that access without even working at a pro team with other high-level coaches is a really lucky thing that you have there in Australia at the moment.
Yeah, and AG is really accepting of me as well as Sarah's coach. And they bring me in and we talk a lot about sort of bits and pieces and that kind of thing. So we get a little bit there too, which has been really handy.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, with this one is from the editor of the podcast. I can't leave him hanging, TJ Hore. The big horse has said, it's actually a good question from him though. VO2 max or lactate threshold, what's a more important indicator for good performance? This is another one that could be a whole podcast, but just a few thoughts on it.
Yeah, great question. I think they're both critically important, and probably threshold as to where it sits in relation to your VO2 max is probably more also important. I'm just going to leave it really boring and bland and just say it depends on what your goals are.
Yeah, I would say I would have the same answer though. If you are looking to win the Tour de France, I would say lactate threshold. If you are looking to win the majority of bike races, I would actually say VO2 max. But again, often we think of just VO2 max as the power that you're doing then, which is you sort of just immediately think 5 or 6 minute power kind of thing, but also the best performance lactate threshold wide tend to have a crazy high VO2 max as well. So a massive crossover there between the two. Really tricky to say which one will be best. It would really depend on the race or the goal. A few more, because there are so many, and sorry for the ones that we won't get to that everyone has sent through. From Sam Hill, do you address weight with your athletes? Sensitive issue but relevant to performance. So yeah, this is a tricky one, and it's something that I'm excited to be doing a podcast next week with. I'll leave the suspense there for who I've got coming on, but I'm going to chat a bit more about the weight thing that's blown up out of the Tour de France Femmes this year. But is it something that you chat about with your athletes, weight management and having a goal weight, trying to manage body composition, or do you leave that aside?
Yeah, okay. It's a really important question, actually. I think in terms of managing weight or diet stuff is beyond my scope, so we always bring in accredited dietitian to do the really hard work in there. But from a training point of view or a conversation point of view, the real message for all my athletes is to feel the workouts really well. And I don't necessarily think body composition is trying to drive body composition. You're not going to get the adaptations in your training that you're after. So fuel it really well, have a really good nutrition plan, and where your body composition sits after doing those two things is good. Make sure you're in a healthy weight zone first, and don't really drive beyond that, because then you get into all sorts of trouble.
Yeah, and so Sarah is definitely one that has, I'm sure, used body composition to target, manipulating body composition to target different goals. And any cyclist, myself included, has done this before. Are you ever involved directly in terms of, do we want to be at this weight by this amount of time, or is it something that you're specifically just immediately for that kind of stuff getting her to go to a team nutritionist or her own personal nutritionist for?
It's the team dietitian definitely takes care of that, but the conversation's never, we need to be at this weight for this event. We talk more so in, excuse me, we talk more so in absolute terms. So we want to have this amount of power for X amount of duration. We actually don't really put much. I know it seems counterintuitive because of climbing and maybe in Sarah's circumstances she seems light, but that's not where the conversation sits. It's all about quality of training, fueling really well, and improving watts as opposed to relative watts. That's where we sit at the minute.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a tricky one as a coach, because it can be frustrating if you are coaching someone trying to improve those absolute watts, trying to improve, work towards a certain goal, and that is being hampered by their efforts to manipulate their body composition, which ultimately it's going to be hampered if they're just under fueling. So, and as I'm sure you have seen many times, ultimately, like if you're under fueled, you're just going to underperform. It's not going to meet they're not going to achieve their goals that they're aiming for anyway if they're under fueled. So that, from my perspective as well, the priority is just always going to be on fueling. It's tricky because you have to be in an energy deficit in order to lose weight, which for most people coming into their goals, that is what they're aiming to do. So it is a really tricky balance. That's why myself as a coach as well, I'd always just recommend to consult a dietitian when you're trying to do that, because it is a really tricky thing. The next podcast episode, I think, it depends which order they come out, we'll be talking about that. It definitely can be done. Like, don't want people to just think that I can't lose weight because I need to be training hard. It's very achievable, and so many athletes for so many years have been able to lose weight and improve power at the same time. But if you want to be able to do it well and you want to be putting your health first, which we should be, then consult a dietitian for that. A few last quick ones here, and like the majority of them we've sort of touched on already so far, and I've got an idea of what your answer will be already here, but with the most recent Tour de France, and these are mostly have been sent to Sarah, which I'm sure she's so sick of, but Sarah got a lot of criticism for her descending, which, first question is, when you ride with Sarah, are you able to actually keep up with her on the descents?
No, not even a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that's the thing. The girls that were descending away from Sarah were going insanely fast. So that's the first thing that a lot of people just don't understand, is that the women at that level are just descending really well. Across the whole sport, people are so worried about the improvements in these climbing times. The improvements in descending times as a percentage are far higher. It is crazy how fast the sport is going downhill now. That's mostly due to technology, but also just due to the stakes being so much higher and riders being prepared to take those risks. But is it something, I'm sure it's something that you have discussed with Sarah, but is it something that you get involved with at all, or is it something that you try to just get her to work on with someone that is a descending coach or a skills coach, particularly?
I'm stoked you've asked, actually, because it's a really hot topic at the moment. And I kind of wish that people would stop messaging her about it and ripping her. I think broadly, I think people need to realise that they're messaging a 24-year-old female and need to just refrain a little bit. But I think, yes, we are working very, very hard in it. Sarah and I wake up every day and try and get better. So it's a really big point at the minute. In terms of, to give you the stats of where Sarah sits, before the Giro, she had done 56 race days in 3 years, which is about the same amount of race days as what Demi Vollering gets in one season. So in terms of racing age, Sarah's still almost a neo-pro because of all her injuries and that kind of thing. And we found ourselves in a very, very good position, winning stages at mountaintops and being very threatening on a GC standpoint because of all the hard work that Sarah put into the training. But as a consequence of that, not only is she having to try and follow Cedrica Bull and Cassia Neodoma, who are some of the world's best descenders down descents, but they're also trying to get rid of her down those descents. So they're not letting her overtake, they're attacking the descent. So it's a really tricky scenario to manage and to work on. It's certainly, Sarah's been on the bike since she was 6 years old. From a skill set point of view, she is very, very skillful. One of the most skillful cyclists, it's hard to believe, but one of the very most skillful cyclists that I've certainly come across. But when you add that element of pressure in a racing scenario, when you're trying to mitigate your limiting abilities on a downhill, it becomes very, very tricky. Recently, I've used like apps like Dartfish, if you're familiar with that, where I think a silver lining to always having cameras on Sarah for descending is we've got heaps of footage, which is really good. So we're using Dartfish to look at lines and analysing that kind of thing, sending that across to a descending coach or a skills acquisition coach that she's going to have over the summer. And then there's a whole host of people that are coming in to help her with that in different sort of modalities and that kind of thing. I firmly believe it's time that she needs to work on those things with those people and get some race experience. It's a very big point, but it's also it's not as big as what people are bringing it out to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's the big thing is that I know as well from not having actually trained with Sarah at all, but from just seeing her times on descents, and she's by all means a very capable descender and goes downhill quicker than the vast majority of the people that would be watching the Tour de France, certainly the vast majority that would be commenting on it. But it is just so different when you're in that race scenario, and that's something that I've found myself is that I'm by no means the fastest descender. At times I've been just one of the worst in races before, just purely from not having been in races that much, particularly like when I first came over to Europe, raced quite a lot in Belgium, was fine positioning in Belgium, took a while to get the hang of, but was at the point where I was really good there, and then I went and raced down a hill and I was terrible at descending. I was like, what the hell, I'm never getting dropped on descents in Australia. It is just a different game when you're in a peloton there, when you're going full tilt down these descents that you haven't seen before. And I know Sarah definitely puts in the work because she's going and reconning every descent that she is doing in these races. It's certainly not through lack of wanting to improve, which is the crazy thing when I see people making these comments is, you can't just go up, you have to work on going down. It's definitely something that she's worked on, but as you touched on, in a race scenario, completely different ball game, and then the fact that all of these riders are trying to drop her as well. But for me personally, I've been at points before of being one of the worst descenders in the peloton. Now it's something that I see as a strength, particularly where I'm racing now in China, where most people just ride on highways all day, so it's a little bit easier to put the pressure on a downhill. But for me, it's just again time in that bunch in races, just repetitive, just being in that situation and going, okay, I'm pretty comfortable now. It's just pushing that comfort zone to the point where you're comfortable in a bunch, and then pushing that comfort zone again to the point where you're comfortable taking more risks than others around you to be at the front. And you can't replicate it in training because it is just crazy dangerous to do that, because you're just putting yourself at risk of crashing and just being hit by a car that's straddling the middle line in the middle of the road, whatever it is. You just cannot take the same amount of risk in training as you would in a race. The other thing is just for me, what has helped my descending in the past when I haven't been that great at it is just riding with really good descenders in training. So been lucky in the last few years, training partner has been Jensen Plowright, who goes absolutely nuts on every descent. But at the same time, when I'm behind him, I know if he's made it around a corner that I can make it around the corner at the same speed. Now, Sarah's not going to go and train with Jensen, but for the majority of Sarah's training partners aren't going to even be with her at the top of the hill because she's going so hard up a hill. And then also she's going to be better descenders than most of her training partners that she's training with as well. So it is really tricky to find that person that you can learn off as well. So that's where obviously she's gone to the work of getting a coach. But it's not just as simple as I want to get better at descending, I'll work on it, and then next week I'll be better at descending, which a lot of people are making it out to be.
No, exactly. And I think from the viewer standpoint, it's either yes or no if she's a good descender. So it's has she stayed in the bunch? She's a good descender. Has she been dropped? She's a bad descender. But what we look at from this tour compared to the last tour, so she got to the Madeline stage. I think she was around about a minute and a half off first on GC. And obviously the courses are different, so you can't compare it. But that same stage in last year's tour, she was about 6 or 7 minutes down on GC. So there is a huge amount of improvement to sort of not be getting dropped on those more technical stages already that we can see.
Yeah. And the thing now will be she has the benefit of having a team that's prepared to support her on descents as well, and have teammates around her, which will be beneficial. But then she also has the downside of every race she goes to now, her opponents will be looking to exploit that. Now, that's sport. Like, yeah, it might seem nasty, but if you also go into any other sport, when someone sees a weakness, they will try to exploit that. I think Sarah can obviously take a lot of... I guess take it as a compliment that now she has the best riders in the world taking crazy risks on a descent to try and drop her, which is pretty cool, because when I'm there at the back of peloton on a descent, no one gives a flying because they don't care that I'm still there because I'm not a threat whatsoever, so they're not trying to drop me. But it is cool that she's in that situation now that there is so many people trying to do that, and then there will be positives and negatives that come with that. But I'm sure that the kind of athlete that she is, that if she is working on it and if she is able to get a clean run where she's able to get those races in, that it is something that, like other things, she will be able to excel at.
Yeah, exactly. We're really confident in the processes that we've put in place. I think it's just time.
Yeah. So I'll wrap it up there, because we've got heaps more questions, but too many to get through. The last one that I will ask you, though, which is one of my usual ones, is what would your best piece of advice be? It's always the trickiest one, but it might be something that you've received yourself or something that you give to every athlete you work with, but best piece of advice.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this all day. My old man sends me and my brother a quote of the week every Friday, and I've been trying to rattle through those and see what I've liked. But I think just don't be scared to fail. So just have a crack, and if you fail, you learn, and you only get better from it. It shouldn't be perceived as a negative thing. It's actually a really, really positive thing that you put yourself outside that comfort zone and can sort of excel and put a foot forward after having it happened. And you only come out the other side.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool, and it shows in what you've done, setting up your own coaching business with a couple of mates. You're all pretty young. You don't have tens of years of experience and clients behind you, and don't have, I assume anyway, millions of dollars in financial backing to set up a brick and mortar coaching place down there on the peninsula. But to just put yourselves out there, set up what will continually grow in that area, and then also yourself as a coach be now coaching what looks like our next Tour de France hope in Australia, is pretty cool. And that only comes from, as you said, just pushing your comfort zone. That is a big thing that I always am, trying to say to athletes I'm working with, or just anyone that I speak to, is you can't make any progress without being a little bit uncomfortable at some point, or you'll just stay in the same place. If you're just always staying comfortable, you'll stay where you are. So it definitely comes in a training perspective in terms of you're having to make these changes to the plan, to how people have been operating before, to get them to progress and move forward. And then, in terms of in general as well, outside of training, that's the way to move forward, is just not being too scared to fail and having a go at things. So looks like it's working super well for you, working super well for the people you're working with. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. No, it was an absolute pleasure.
Cheers. Well, if you like this, go over and follow the Pinnacle Performance guys on Instagram. They're putting up some good stuff there. And Dylan is still single, if you missed that memo earlier in the episode, so you can get onto that. If you like this episode, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Listen to the future ones. As I said, we do have a good one coming up, which I will be recording in the next few days, discussing the whole body composition side of things. So that one will hopefully be out soon after this one. Aside from that, make sure you keep riding, keep enjoying what you're doing, and we'll see you for the next episode. Cheers.